When it comes to making the best burgers around, the basics matter. And Wendy's, well, they really got those burger basics on lock. And boy, does it show. What's the secret to all those hot and juicy burgers? Simple. Wendy's always crafts their burgers with that fresh, never frozen beef that they're famous for. The result? Hot and juicy hamburger perfection every time. No matter whether you're ordering the Baconator, the Dave Single, any burger from Wendy's menu, you already know that thanks to those Wendy's burger basics, it's going to be exactly what you were craving. Fresh beef available in the contiguous U.S., Alaska, and Canada. Not available in Hawaii. Get yourself a fresh Wendy's burger today. And our freshest move this week, our Wendy's fresh move of the week, I'm naming Ralph Russo the ombudsman for Andy and Ari on 3. And he's going to tell us exactly what we got right and what we got wrong in our first season back together. Welcome to Andy and Ari on 3. We are honored to be joined by a guy who just showed up randomly at my door. Ralph Russo at the Athletic. Not random, but it was pretty interesting. I was like, hey, can you come on the show? He's like, well, I might actually be in your town in a few days.
I don't live in Florida, so it's very rare that I happen to be in Gainesville. But yes, I actually want people to think that I just happen to be roaming around and decided to come and found Andy's house. I didn't even know where you lived.
Yeah, you just wander. You look for the grill smoke, and you're like, there it is. We found it.
Yeah, I found that the Staples estate is lovely. It's the first time I've been here. It's great to see you in person. But yes, this was very, very fortuitous. I happened to be in your great state and happened to be visiting some folks in Gainesville. So this worked out wonderfully.
Well, so I have decided to bestow an honor upon Ralph as I think Ralph might be my favorite listener of the show, along with, being a colleague and a great sports writer who covers college football. But I've decided to make Ralph the official Andy and Ari on 3 ombudsman. And so before we do that, we have to explain to Ari what an ombudsman is.
Yes. Yeah. And not just me. Don't make me feel stupid. There's a lot of people who are listening to the show.
There are people in the audience that it is a pretty unfamiliar word if you're not a regular New York Times reader. I'm sorry. not to make fun of the parent company there, Ralph.
Well, no, and listen, it's kind of an old word,
right?
It's an old word from a time way in the past when newspapers were a big deal, right? There was a whole bunch of your listening audio or your followers here who, newspapers.
Too young for this, yeah.
What's a newspaper? Well, right. An ombudsman is think of it as quality control.
Yeah,
in-house quality control. The person who makes sure within the house that you're getting facts right. You're presenting your arguments well, that you're making sure that you're upholding the standards of the organization. And I think On 3 has some high standards. So we got to make sure that this show upholds those standards. Mostly you, Ari. Really,
do you guys think that I'm the stupidest person that's ever been published in that newspaper?
I mean, you'd be probably I would think, let's put it this way. The simple fact that you threw that out makes me think that you're probably in the running, but probably not. I don't think.
Yeah,
this is like when
looking
I asked
up at my wall here.
Florida's walk-on program, was I the worst walk-on in program history? And his response was, I'll have to think about it, but I think there were some kickers who were worse than you.
Right. But the simple fact that I got to think about it, I think is all it needs to be said. Right. I couldn't give you a definitive no.
If you came into my house, my entire office is covered with New York Times front page stories that I wrote over the time that we were there.
Now, what sort of megalomaniac narcissist would put covers of publications that they used to write for up in their office?
It's
my
do
such a
office.
As we say, Ralph is looking at one of my SI covers that I have blown up to 5 feet. I don't know, 6 feet on the wall.
The Alabama press box in Tuscaloosa, Bryant Denny. There's a walkway behind the seating area that has these SI covers over the years that are blown up, but also have a backlight to them. They're beautiful. They look beautiful. And we were walking by them when Andy and I first started podcasting together at the Athletic. And half of them, or if not more, were by Andy. I'm like, why is this not in your house? I would do that. I would spend however much money it should be.
At least one of them.
There used to be 3 of those in here, but I don't work for them anymore.
You should buy a home with a long walkway where it takes 10 feet to get from the front door to the living room and just line the foyer with it. See, I know what that
I'll throw
word
you.
means.
I'll throw you one thing, Ari, about the Times aspect of things. So I've been doing this job for a long time, previously for the Associated Press. My sister, for the first time, understands what I do because she can open the New York Times and see a story of mine. So for the first time in my life, my sister understands what I do for a living.
But
And
there's
was
definitely
impressed by
been
it.
your stories in the New York Times. That's what the AP is. It's in every newspaper in America, isn't it?
But not in the New York Times because they had their own people.
Yes, but not in the New York
They don't want
Times, the
AP.
one in paper that impresses.
He was
my
in the
sister. Right.
Peoria Journal Star, but that's different.
Right. My sister, who lives in Long Island, is not getting those papers, but she does get the New York Times, and now she's impressed by me after 30 years doing the job.
I think that she missed all those stories from Jackson, Mississippi, when you were the AP correspondent down there.
Yeah, she's not a big college football fan to start, so there's also a little bit of that going on. But.
Well, you are, Ralph, and I love when I get a text from you 2 days after a show arguing with me in real time about something Ari has said on the show, and I'm like, wait a second, who said that? When did we say that? Oh, that was Ari. So I have assigned Ralph to review our first college football season back together, Ari. And he is going to break down what we got right, what we got wrong, and we can hash it out a little bit here. So, Ralph, I think you mentioned a few things. Mm-hmm. I would like to start, not because if we put his name in the title, everybody's going to click on it, but maybe a little bit of that. Our Arch Manning discussion that we held pretty much from the middle of the year on through the playoff.
Which is incredible, considering he never started a game.
He did start 2 games.
He started 2.
But he never, yes, that's a good point. Correction on the ombudsman. The ombudsman has to make a correction.
You're fired.
So
I'm the ombudsman now. I'm the captain now.
Look at me.
Yes, now that you know what an ombudsman and you can be an ombudsman. So the Arch Manning discussion I found to be among the more interesting and at times frustrating discussions I would hear from the two of you. And Ari, I want you to understand, I am not here to just constantly gang up on you.
That's okay if you are.
That's gonna happen, but I'm not here. But I'm not necessarily trying to just make it a gang up on Ari show.
Listen, Ralph. This has been our entire history. Like, I think people know what they're getting when we and you interact. It's you don't have to. It shouldn't be just our show. It should just be all the takes that I've had that made you angry. But actually, I feel like I'm improving. Like, I feel like I've improved.
He's got a couple that he liked, though.
A couple that made me just want to hug you. There was a couple, at least one that made me want to hug you, but not the Arch Manning one. Mm-hmm. The Arch Manning take and the back and forth between you and Andy on Arch Manning just would rattle through my brain and at times make my head hurt, because essentially what Ari ended up arguing for much of the year was you can't play Arch because it'll make the internet mad. Right? Like, you can't play Arch because then you might have to answer a question about Arch, as opposed to Andy's take was, I have the best backup quarterback in the country. If I have to play him, I'm going to play him.
But if I thought he was better than my starter, I would play him.
I would actually play him, right? Yeah. So it's okay to sort of go back and forth with the idea of, hey, maybe Arch should play more. But often I felt like Ari's position was, well, once you play Arch, you're opening up a hornet's nest, and now you're going to have to answer, is Arch going to play? Which is good podcast fodder, but it can never be the way you coach your team. You have a good player. If you feel like he is going to help you win a game, you use him in the spots to help you win a game. And frankly, if you don't think he can be useful in winning that game, then you don't play him, because you already have a good quarterback. So I just felt like Ari, like often throughout the Arch Manning discussion, you were sort of talking like a podcaster, as if that was relevant to Steve Sarkisian, as if Steve Sarkisian should take into account what the podcasters.
You know what the funniest thing about this is? They should have played him at the end of the year more and didn't. Like, that's the funniest thing. Like, I feel like at the end of the year, had they designed a package for him, if what you're saying about, playing the best player and the best backup and putting him in a position where he can help you win a game, I think there were certain instances, both in the SEC championship game and in the Ohio State game, that maybe a different look might have opened something up and gotten them an extra score that might have helped them advance in the playoff. But like, that's the thing, that you're missing a piece of context about this conversation that is really important to the way that conversation started, which was Andy spent the entire first half of the season before the Georgia game talking about how brilliantly Steve Sarkisian has handled the pressure and the difficulty of having a player like Arch Manning on the bench. So when he just threw him into the game when they were down 20-0 to Georgia in the first
because Quinn Ewers was not playing well.
Because Quinn Ewers wasn't playing well.
And the job is to win the game.
My only point was, you can no longer say that he handled it masterfully when he did the one thing that you can't do to continue to keep things at bay. That's not the one
thing you can't do. When your job's to win the game and your quarterback that you have in there is not helping you win the game, you try another quarterback. Now, in that particular case, the other quarterback didn't help you win the game either, so they went back to the first one.
Yeah. So the thing is that I actually feel like I got towards the end of the year and got to a point in watching Texas's offense, especially when you and I were together in Nashville, Andy, watching the SEC title game on TV, that Texas's offenses needed something. They needed something to spark them. And because he threw Arch Manning into the game against Georgia in the first matchup, and he had a multiple game run of starting as a result of Quinn Ewers' injury, I was led to believe, and he also had that package for him in the A&M game that led to a touchdown.
Because Quinn Ewers was hurt. He had a bum ankle.
But I got to a point where I was like, well, maybe they need him now. And it's at a point in which I felt like they could have used him. He was confusingly absent. So the whole way they used him all year was kind of bizarre to me.
So I think you're confusing two things, though. You can make an argument that Texas could have been better off late in the year, maybe in the SEC championship game, maybe in the Ohio State game, maybe not.
I'll say, look, because I'm going to kind of defend Ari on this a little bit here. If Arch comes out blazing next year, there will be some real litigation of how the end of last season was handled.
I
was going to ask how you guys think this is going to age if he turns out to be a superstar too.
But that's proving, you're trying to disprove negative there. Oh, he should have played last year. Would he have been as good?
I already think that. Let the record show that I already think he should have played more at the end of the year.
That's fine, and you may end up being ultimately correct on that. And if you are, I will not argue with that.
But I don't know how you are proved correct. If Arch is awesome starting next season, I don't know if that necessarily is proof that Arch would have been good if they just inserted.
But he was good enough to come into the game down 20-0 against Georgia.
Well, because they needed
Quinn Ewers wasn't good enough at that moment. So you give it a shot.
But I'm saying if you think that your backup
quarterback
is better than Quinn Ewers,
Arch would have played the rest of the year. That's the part you're not thinking about. If Arch had led them back or made them even somewhat competitive, we might not have seen Quinn again.
Yeah, but I feel like the discussion isn't whether or not he should have played him and whether or not that would create chaos. I think the question, I think those are two separate things. I thought it would create chaos and they handled it differently, but that doesn't mean that Steve Sarkisian makes coaching decisions based on that. Right? Did I say that? Maybe I did. Well, I don't know. I don't remember saying that.
Came across
it's not what you said and the reasoning you gave for it is not something that would ever cross a coach's mind mid-game when he's trying to give his team a spark.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I think I agree with that.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that Sarkisian played it fine. I have a great backup quarterback, and when I need to use that backup quarterback, I'm going to use him, even if it's down 21-0, and when my guy is hurt and needs a spark. And again,
you guys remember Quinn Ewers after that game?
What do you mean by that?
The way his body language was in the locker room was his dog.
You mean he was sad?
I'm not down with that body language in the locker room.
Looked like he was going to cry.
Most people are sad when they lose.
Yeah, we're all big boys here.
Yeah,
we're all getting paid, especially those guys. Now.
They're really getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. This is what
it's okay to be sad sometimes.
Yeah. You lost. You didn't play well. it's okay. We're going to try somebody else. We're not here to worry about like Quinn's
Yeah,
feelings.
it ain't show business. It ain't show feeling, or it ain't show family. It ain't show feelings. It's show business.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I thought that Sark handled that just fine in general. And I thought that you got a little bogged down with some of the body language and what does this mean going forward. And now you've created a possible quarterback controversy. For the most part, I thought everything went down just fine with Arch. And the fact that you got a little hung up on whether you should play him and what it means to sort of play him, I just don't think that is really relevant. I think that you make these decisions in the moment as a coach, and then but I will. From there.
Can I throw this out to both of you guys, because I do think this is the more interesting part of the conversation now as we have it in February. How many people in the Texas fan base do you think would have liked to see Arch playing at the end of last season? How many of them?
You mean
think
starting or playing? Those are different.
Farther?
Starting or playing?
Starting.
Oh, I think that's different. I think that at least 80% would probably be, he should be playing some. But I don't know if 80% would be like, take the job away from him completely.
Gotcha.
But I also have an issue with this whole he should be playing some and have a package. Because again, it sort of makes Arch out to be
a gadget guy.
A gadget guy like Arch is Cam Newton, right? He's going to go.
Well, he does something that Quinn doesn't.
What do you mean, Tim Tebow?
Or Tim Tebow. Or he's going to be the
Tim Tebow is a freshman. Yeah,
but he does something specifically good that Quinn Ewers is incapable of. But that's why that happens.
Does he do it that much better? Does he do it that well?
I mean, enough to create a package for him in the A&M game. I mean, they did it. They already showed, they brought him in on fourth down running situations. They did running packages for him in A&M, and I believe he scored twice in that game, at least once. And the thing that I think is most ironic about this entire discussion is that my whole thing at the time of that bothered you was that if you put Arch in, you're going to mess up the minutia of the locker room potentially. You're going to mess with your starters, thought process or feelings or confidence. You're going to create a circus of quarterback controversy and all those things. And all those things upset you. But I think it's kind of funny now in the ability now to look back at the season. It's like, was all that worth it? When you didn't even use him, when you could have used him in big games at the end.
He took a shot in the Ohio State game. I don't know that he could have come in.
You just also said something interesting. Was all what worth it? They got to the semifinals.
He still got asked in every news conference for like a month whether Arch was going to play afterward. His quarterback could have had. It didn't turn out that way.
He makes $9 million a year. He can handle a question every once in a while.
Yeah, it didn't. I know. Like Texas.
I'm just saying at the risk of it.
Texas reached the semifinals and was the most competitive team against the best team in college football last year. So I think Texas had a great season. Like they maxed out. Like how much better would they have been if they had leaned into Arch? Also,
how much better would they have been had they put Arch Manning in the game on 2nd and goal from the 2 down 7 with 2 minutes left and had a package that he was prepared to run?
I'm not sure they could have done that in that game. I'm not sure that was available to them.
And none of us knows, and I know we probably want to move on a little bit, but I would also say, again, it always goes back to this with this whole conversation about I'm going to kind of defer to Steve Sarkisian, thinking that he might know which one of those.
I don't know. He did call that toss.
Yeah.
So maybe not.
Yeah. Why was Arch not injured? I don't remember. Was he injured or something?
He took a shot in that game.
Oh, okay. So he might not have been able to come in. But it is kind of a fun thing to think. It's like, how much better would they have been? I don't know if they brought him in and they gave him more reps at interesting run packages from the goal line. Maybe they wouldn't have had that turnover that led to the loss, and they would have played for the national title this year. I don't know. They were pretty close to tying the game, Ralph, and they didn't have a running situation there. And there's a quarterback on the bench that presumably is good at that sort of thing. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I made an okay point, right? I'm not
just solid point, but again, I feel like you're jumping to a big conclusion there of trying to here's this thing that didn't happen, and you never know. Maybe it would have happened if you had gone with my thing.
That is what the 9 months of the college football offseason is all about, though, right?
But I also don't. When you say things, sometimes I get enraged and I'm like, that's not what I meant. Or I think that you were right in how you took what I was saying. And I think I agree with you that maybe I overblew it a little bit.
There you go.
Now, here's where Ralph is going to praise Ari, because there's another take that was an all-season take by Ari. He never backed off of it. And I think this was your finest work.
Yeah. Ari identifying immediately that Notre Dame was still a playoff team, a championship contender, even though they had lost
to Northern Illinois. The next morning,
never backed down on that. And not only was it a good take because they played for the national championship, the Fighting Irish did, even if the Penn State game goes a different way, you were right. Like, you were right, not only because of the result, you were right because of your thought process, which is far more important because we are not here to predict the future, right? Predicting the future is fun, and when you get it right, that's great. But that's not. But
unless you had money on it, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but unless you have money on it, that doesn't really matter. And it's very hard to predict the future. But what Ari was able to do is identify how good Notre Dame was and why throughout their schedule they would still be in this thing, and that's exactly how it played out. So the fact that you stuck to your guns and you were at the forefront of Notre Dame, I think, is going to be okay here. Was a spectacular take and very solid analysis.
And I'm happy that you said that.
I remember sitting there with you in Columbus because we were in Columbus. We were talking to Ryan Day the next day. So the week 2 games happened. We were in Ann Arbor covering Michigan, Texas. We watch Notre Dame lose. And the next day we were in Columbus and we're like, oh, we'll shoot the videos out in front of the horseshoe. It'll be cool. And I remember sitting there talking to you and you're like, Notre Dame's going to be fine. Notre Dame's going to be a playoff team. It's going to be just fine. I'm like, there's no way the team that just lost to Northern Illinois is ever going to go undefeated the rest of the way. And sure enough, they did.
Well, I'm happy. The thing that you said there, Ralph, that I think is interesting and is lost in a lot of what we do is that I'm never overly concerned about whether I'm ultimately right in a prediction or a thought. I think that it's all about the analysis of the situation, and you do the best that you can with the information that we have to try to prognosticate the future. It's never, throw crap against the wall and maybe you're right sometimes and maybe you're not. It's like I have sound thinking with the information that I have in this moment to say this thing. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. 4 years ago when Jim Harbaugh was, having a rough time of it, I thought he should have been fired. And that didn't and I looked at their recruiting results and the way that they assembled their roster. I'm like, there's no way this team can win a national championship. And I think with the information that I had in that moment, that was a fair and sound, reasonable take. And they went off to do something that was remarkable. And but I don't feel bad about being wrong about that because I used, again, rational thought with the information in the moment. So, Notre Dame went on to be, I think, even better than I anticipated, in terms of where they went. But, I saw the ingredients that they had on their roster and I looked at their schedule and I thought, well, did they lose to NIU because they're not as good as NIU, or did they just have a terrible day where they didn't take their opponent seriously? And I'm very proud of myself about that one because I have I'm prone to overreacting and changing my mind or being wooed by what just happened. And I'm happy that I was able to remain steadfast in the analysis of what they had on their roster and that they proved me right.
We have video of a very early Ari Notre Dame take.
I would go back to 48 hours ago and I would do whatever I could to have my job at On3 start soon so I could scream from the mountaintops what I've been feeling in my loins for the entire summer ever since I talked to Pete Sampson on my old podcast. Notre Dame is going undefeated this year. That's my official prediction, and it does not hit the same after they go into College Station and win the way that they did. But I want you guys to know, and I mean this Scout's honor, that's what I felt coming into the year. I think they've got a very good defense. They're very physical. Their quarterback needs to stay healthy. They might have some options between Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and guys like that on this team to finally have some offensive explosiveness on the outside. Their schedule stinks. They are in a position right now where if I had to draw it up and what I would guess if I was doing the bracketology thing, 5 seed.
So and obviously that was before they lost to NIU, but nonetheless, the fact that you stuck to your guns. And the reason why, again, I was impressed with the fact that you stuck with it because it was easy. Andy and I had the easy take.
We easily overreacted. Yes.
Well, but the easy take after NIU was not necessarily that they're done, because I think even you and I hesitated to say they're done.
Mine was a team that would lose to a team like that. It simply is not capable of running the table.
That was sort of the easy, safe take that we all went to. Yes, of course, if they run the table, they're going to be in the mix here. But how is that team that I just saw going to run the table?
Yeah.
they're too deficient here, there, and everywhere. So the fact that you stuck with what you thought and rode it to a national championship game, so to speak, was pretty impressive. And again, not just because you were right, but because you had sound analysis there.
And then also doubled down before the playoff too.
Yeah.
I had them beating Georgia and people freaked out. I feel pretty good about it. Notre Dame has a soft spot in my heart now for making me look good for once.
You should dress up like a leprechaun.
Yeah, I don't
Why
know.
have I not thought of this?
I can't believe that.
This is incredible.
Chubby Jewish guy as a leprechaun would be a pretty electric picture, wouldn't it?
I cannot listen. They would do it. That dude who plays the leprechaun's cool. Like, I feel like he would let us borrow the costume. You've lost a lot of weight. I think you can fit into it now.
Wait a second.
Yeah, I think you can.
And I don't mean that. Yes, you've lost a lot of weight. You look tremendous. But the leprechaun costume is supposed to be small,
very form-fitting. But
right.
I'm in.
The whole idea.
You
of
know what?
After
this, I got to go get a swimsuit for Cabo. I'm wearing a size large XL. Like, I don't know. I mean, it might not be tight like Andy, but maybe I'll wear some Spanx or something. And
you
and
would
tighten
still
that
be
stuff
the
up.
world's largest leprechaun, though.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
first Jewish leprechaun.
At 190 pounds, I'm still like a pretty large, broad-shouldered guy. So, yeah. And I'm also like a foot taller than the guy that was dressed like a leprechaun at the game.
That's what I'm saying.
I am so excited to see this. Like, the images in my head, and we're going to make this happen. We are going to dress you as a leprechaun at some point in the offseason. We have to. I want to spin this forward a little bit, guys, this Notre Dame conversation, because we saw them go deep in the playoff and do it in a way that I also never would have predicted at the beginning of the season. If you told me Notre Dame will have 5 season-ending injuries to very key players, including maybe their best defensive player, I would have said this is not possible because Notre Dame can't be that deep.
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Freeman has proven us wrong that Notre Dame can be that deep. Can Notre Dame continue to be that deep? Is this something that we should expect year in and year out now?
Well, I think that the thing here, Ralph, I'll go first, then I'll let you go. Yeah. But the thing that is interesting about Notre Dame, and I think it's the same with Oregon and South Carolina and all the teams like Illinois, for instance, maybe not so much as South Carolina and the other teams, but the depth in which you need to be now isn't the same as what it was 4 years ago. So they might, like, how deep was Notre Dame, or is it just other teams that they were playing were shallower? Like, that's the question.
That may be it, yeah.
So, I'll let you go, Ralph, but I feel like Notre Dame this year was still a very good team, and the analysis that I had of that bared out to be true, but I still don't know that this year's Notre Dame team would have been able to stay on the same field as 2020 Bama, because they played one of them this year, and they had a really good game, I thought, for what they were facing.
They came back at the end against Ohio State, but they were not as good as Ohio State.
They weren't in the game until way late. So, like that to me, it's like, can Notre Dame be what they were this year again? I think absolutely. Can Notre Dame
which may be good enough to win the national title in the next 5 years?
Exactly. I just don't know that I ever think that Notre Dame could. Like, I think it's conceivable that Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, maybe even Clemson, if they start working the portal a little bit better, could be as deep as teams that we've seen in the late, teens, early 20s, maybe. I don't know that Notre Dame can ever be that deep. I think that Notre Dame can be deep enough in the right year to win the national title, though.
Right. So you stole my thunder there, but that's okay. I'll spin off of it. The question is, Notre Dame's sustainability is in part a question about the state of the sport. Right. Like, how is this the new state of play where you don't have to have a super team with, a talent composite score of over 1,000 to win a national championship? My guess is, as much as they have gotten better, if we're just talking about next year, listen, a lot's going to depend on how the quarterback plays, and if CJ Carr is the guy, right, or Steve Angeli is the guy. So from a very micro angle, I think they're probably going to have a fair amount of talent coming back on defense. Their offensive line should be amazing, and it's probably going to come down to the quarterback. So, which makes me think that Notre Dame is clearly in position to be a consistent playoff team. Whether they can get back to the national championship game and then maybe take it one step further, I think is more of a global discussion about the state of the sport.
I would agree with that. And the thing is, if Ari and I are right, because Ari and I have said this a million times since the season ended, there will not be a team like Ohio State there won't be a 2024 Ohio State in 2025.
Yeah.
Where they're just loaded to the gills with old, really good players.
Well, and that's the other thing too with Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's team had a little bit of this too.
They had some old, really good players.
Yeah,
too.
and they might be one of the schools that is best suited to get the old teams,
because you don't really want to transfer out of Notre Dame until you get the Notre Dame degree.
Right. I think they are. If part of the new state of college football is we're going to have some older teams that are going to close the gap on the 3-and-done heavy teams by simply having a few extra 4th and 5th year guys, 22 and 23 years old. I think Notre Dame is situated to have those types of teams maybe more frequently than a lot of the other contenders.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of that.
This is the sort of stuff I guess we need to start thinking. Exactly.
That's why I'm here.
That's why we have the ombudsman.
Yeah. Like the Notre Dame, the way that place is and the type of person that goes there to begin with is the type of person that might want to stay longer.
Right. You don't choose that to say, well, if I'm not playing after a year, I'm out. You choose Notre Dame because in part you want to get a Notre Dame degree, because if you're being recruited by Notre Dame, you're also being recruited by a lot of other places that are good at football that put people in the NFL. And you're picking that probably in part because you would like that degree or be part of that alumni network. So it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if that will be something that the Michigans and the Notre Dames and those schools can hang their hats on.
I think being able to recreate that Michigan model, and I'm always going to refer to it as the Michigan model.
The 2023 Michigan. Yeah.
And frankly, Washington did it too that year.
Yeah. I would say Ohio State did it last year.
And they absolutely did it last year. But being able to create what I'm going to always think of as the Michigan model and how often we can do that going forward, again, is going to be a big story in terms of the state of college football in this new era.
Busy mornings, working lunches. I got the solution for you. This is the Huel Black Edition. 35 grams of protein, 27 vitamins and minerals, 7 grams of fiber. This is a meal in a bottle, and it's a godsend when you are a very busy parent, when you're a very busy person in general. I can grab one in the morning. That's my breakfast. Gets me through to lunch. My wife will take one to work. My kids will grab them if they need a quick meal and they don't have time to forage for something or cook something or get me to cook something. It's a great deal. So right now, go to Huel.com. That's Huel.com. Use the code Staples15 for 15% off plus a free gift on your first purchase of $75 or more. Huel.com, Staples15, 15% off plus free gift, your first purchase of $75 or more. You will not regret it, because there's going to be a day when you are incredibly busy. You're like, what am I going to do? I'm starving. I need to get through to lunchtime. I got to work. How am I going to handle this? You grab a bottle of Huel. They take care of you. Speaking of the state of college football and the new era, there is another topic that Ralph, I remember many text messages on this particular time. This is a years long debate.
Oh, it's probably more than that.
That came to a head this year because we actually got to see an expanded playoff, and then you had Ari calling Paul Feinbaum an existential threat, enraging Brad from Macon, creating great content for the show. But Ralph, what were your thoughts on all that?
So it's funny because Ari was definitely a playoff obstructionist for a long period of time. Hung up on old ideals and, the pursuit of excellence, which I think was essentially the core of why you were wrong. But I also
the pursuit of being one of the schools with the money, one of the 3 schools with the money to have the best recruits.
Right.
Yeah.
But your pivot during this season, and I don't think it's a pivot because you were a flip flopper. I just thought you understood what was being in play with this particular season's the first round of this playoff, and being the champion of Indiana and being the champion of, to a certain degree, SMU, right? These teams that maybe their schedules weren't great. And, your argument came down to the games have to matter, right? And I thought that was the crux.
It's a good argument, too.
The crux of an excellent argument that I understand that we can do power rankings and things along those lines. But at a certain point, if the games don't matter, if we're not rewarding winning on the field, then we could just throw out the season. And why are we even playing a season? Take the talent composite and throw it out there. And that would be the way to just, determine a national championship. So when you were making those arguments through a big portion of the season, I found myself, again, never more in love with you, Ari. Never did you look better, because you just nailed.
Where do you see him in the leprechaun costume?
You nailed the whole essence of why the playoff in some ways needed to expand, right? To include the great story of Indiana, the great stories of SMU, and also to maybe understand that the fourth, fifth, or sixth best team, the fifth, sixth, or seventh best team in the country could be a really good team that was worth giving a platform in the postseason that could win a national championship. The last thing I would say, the pivot there, though, is I think, unfortunately, your argument undercut your previous argument and showed why you were so wrong, right?
Yeah.
Because I think you're often your fallback on we have to reward excellence. Miss this idea. When you don't have a playoff, you're actually rewarding randomness. You're rewarding Notre Dame happening to go undefeated in 2012 when they clearly weren't the second best team in the country, but they won a bunch
They're
of
actually number one going into the
they were number one
game.
But they won a bunch of close games. Meanwhile, Oregon loses an overtime game, I think it was that year, to Stanford,
and I would argue Texas A&M at the end of that season would have beaten anybody,
and Texas A&M possibly gets beaten. If you have an actual playoff, you grow the sample size, and it allows you to then better identify who the best team is, because what you're rewarding over a 12-game season to a certain degree is randomness, just like, for example, Ohio State, Michigan this past year. That was just a rando result that happens because sports are great and we get weird games. And every once in a while, the team that's supposed to win is not supposed to win. But the old system emphasized too much of the randomness, which was cool and had some quirks. And listen, as a college football fan from way back in the day, I like weird national champions, but I think the system is better served moving on from that and actually identifying the best team. And the way you do that is create a bigger sample size of good games where teams have to play other good teams. Good teams play other good teams.
So where I erred, because I think that, I will admit now that I was probably wrong about the expansion. And the reason why I was so steadfastly against it was because I was also married to what the sport looked like in 2019. I was still in my head feeling like when you go into a season and you can pick between 6 teams who have enough talent to win the national championship, and you're going to be right 95% of the time, if not 100%, then what's the point of playing with 12 teams when we can't even find 5? But then I look at the preseason top 15 that Andy and I have put together, top 25, and it's like, I don't have any idea who the national champion is going to be next year. And there's no list or composite ranking where I can use as a cheat sheet to say, well, the national champion will be one of these 6 or 7 teams. Now, the other part of that too, because I think that what you said before the show was that my championing of Indiana and my argument base against Paul Feinbaum and Brad from Macon undercuts my previous thing. But at the same time, I don't know if my thought process of the importance of talent has changed. My thought process has changed in that if we're going to have this system and you're going to have 12, then we can't throw results out from teams who actually win, because that's the point of expanding it. I don't want to expand it just to throw a 3-loss team in there, because I think they may be good. I still think that you need to reward the teams that take care of business. So the thing that is so crazy to me is that I don't know if you saw the Brad from Macon debate that I just had with this guy a few days ago. There's a lot of.
I'm going to be honest.
It was tremendous. It's going to be great in flight. I will send you the video.
You will love me.
I've been a little tied up the last couple of days, so I am behind on the most current shows. I'm going to just.
But it's still the same rerun of
Oh,
if
we
you
got video.
think that they should just put Ole Miss or South Carolina in, then you're alienating 85% of fan bases out there because their team's games won't matter. And like the thing that is interesting to me is like, as funny as it is to laugh at Brad from Macon, who's a Georgia fan, who of course feels that way. There were a lot of people in prominent media positions who were tweeting and saying very similar things as this was happening, including Paul. And I would love, and I still haven't had the opportunity to have that debate with him, because I want to know from people who cover the sport or were getting 1,000 retweets from SEC fans about this, what their actual platform is to the other side of that argument. Because I feel like for me, it's like, oh, Ari, I love you so much for saying what you said. And it's like, I appreciate that, Ralph, but I don't even know what the counterpoint is. Like,
Well,
I feel like
you're
it's so obvious. Like, what's the actual counterpoint? To live in a world where results don't matter and we just throw shit against the wall and whatever happens, happens? Like, no, of course we have to have some sort of structure.
That was the old college football system. That's
Well, the
how
old
it used
college
to work.
football system worked out because there was a clear tier upper echelon of teams. Those teams.
We don't really know, actually.
So let me push back on you for a second here, Ari, because I think
we did, because they didn't lose very often.
Well, but let me because you covered one of the teams. This is one that we get back to, and it was at the very beginning of the super team era. The 2015 Ohio State team was eliminated from the playoff because of randomness, because of a wet game that they didn't give the ball to Zeke.
Yeah, Urban Meyer forgot Zeke was on the team.
Right.
You guys watched the whole season, though, right? They played like ass the entire year.
No,
they were dysfunctional the entire year.
And the funny thing is, the funny thing is
that they, after Zeke went off on your question,
right,
they figured it out.
Right. And my point, but my point, Ari, is like the funny thing was, like, even though I was national, I actually covered like 4 Ohio State games that year. I was in Columbus a lot that year. So I did see a lot of that team. And yes, I remember, in fact, bring up Northern Illinois. There was that weird Northern Illinois game early in the season that they needed a pick 6 to finally separate from the Huskies. So you're right. But my point being is that, like, that season, Michigan State got into the playoff because of randomness.
Right.
And I
got blown out by Alabama.
But I think there's a lot of people that root
covered
for Michigan State that would push back and be offended by your analysis.
But of course they deserved to be in the playoff. They did.
The rules of engagement were different then, so they deserved to get in then. Just like Cincinnati deserved to get in.
No, at the notion that you think that it was random that Michigan State won the game.
But no, Ari, if you put 2015 Ohio State in a 12-team playoff that year,
they win, just like this year. Same thing.
I don't know. Well, I don't know that they would have beaten Alabama or Clemson, but it would have been fun to see.
Yeah.
My point is because I always tell you, I look at these things a little bit like not all or nothing, and I have a very analytical brain. If Michigan State and Ohio State played 10 times that year, Ohio State probably wins, 8 of them?
Maybe even 9.
And that's a very good Michigan State team.
And it was a very good Michigan State team. So again, my whole argument for the playoff had always sort of been that, like, I think we were leaning too much into one result can eliminate a team that was really good. So I only bring up that team to push back on. I know for the most part, the 14 playoff, there was very rarely situations where you thought, oh, that team got left out. Maybe they could have won it all, because we were going through an era of these monster teams. But I think there was enough. And Ohio State is actually probably the team.
I'll go back to 2012 because we mentioned Oregon. We mentioned Texas A&M. The 2012 Georgia team might have been the one that ultimately won the national title, because they played that classic SEC championship game against Alabama before Alabama played Notre Dame.
Right.
I 1000% agree with what you're saying, but my previous notion of that, having covered that team, is that they returned a bulk of their roster from a team that won the national championship the year before. A lot of them, Ohio State arrived a year early. Like 15 was supposed to be another year.
2015 Ohio State is 1999 Tennessee. Like,
but when you look
the
at
same team that won the national title, maybe even more talented than it was, but they've already gotten there, and so they're all not as focused as they were the year before.
When you look at the entire season, though, and the fact that half their roster had one foot in the NFL and one foot in college, they couldn't figure out who their starting quarterback was. They middled through the season. They never found sharpness. It's like, the Michigan State game, I guess you could say, came down. It was probably the biggest blunder of Urban Meyer's coaching career. You could say randomness, but I got to finish this, Andy. I have to finish.
Okay,
this.
Go ahead.
My point is that a team that played like that all year didn't deserve to win the national title that year, even if they had a roster that was good enough to theoretically run the table after the fact. They did not play like champions all year. So even though they didn't win or they didn't get to go, like that was the price of admission, was to be great and be great consistently. And that Ohio State team, though individually great, never lived up to that billing. And that's why winning a national title is hard. Did the best team win the national title in the four team era every year? I probably would say most of the time. But even in the years that they didn't, the teams that ended up losing didn't do enough with what they had in order to play for it. And that was my.
I would argue that the 2015 Ohio State team actually figured it out one game earlier than the 2024 Ohio State team, because I was at the 2015 Michigan Ohio State game. That was a different team because they booted the OC up to the box. They changed their play calling structure. They were a completely different organization at that point because of the question you asked, Zeke. Really?
I don't know. I get a title ring, but at the same time, too, it's like part of winning a national championship is not having the ability in that era to figure it out in week 12. Like you have to figure it out earlier. You have to be great. You have to be a champion.
They were great. They just weren't great yet.
So, and my whole argument to you, when we constantly go back and forth on this stuff, and I know you're a changed man now. You've seen the light. Is the system is better giving those teams a chance to win the national championship. It's better for the sport to open up the field and allow those teams to win a national championship than have so much in play on just a couple of random results.
And I think I agree with that. The thing I'm interested to see in college football is if the next 4 national champions are 6 through 8 seeds that were just Georgia, Bama, Ole Miss type teams that were like really, really good that didn't do good enough. You know what changed my mind? What really changed my mind was ASU. Like having their story told.
Being in the game against Texas. Yeah.
Yeah. That Cam Scattaboo game against Texas. Like the fact that in a previous life or 4 years ago in the 4-team era, Cam Scattaboo would not have had that moment. The entire country might not still know who he is. The fact that we as college football fans and writers were enriched and blessed enough to be along for that ride is what changed my mind.
And that
it's
was
not
what we
giving
were trying
Ohio
to get
State
across, though.
Yeah, and that's what I was. And that's
we were
exactly
trying to tell you is that
I
these
was wrong
stories
about that.
And these teams are better situated to be celebrated, and you get more value, quite frankly, from them if you're putting them on a bigger stage. In the old format, kick those teams aside and say, well, you're not good enough to play for a national championship, so you don't get nothing.
You can play in the Peach Bowl against a team that's going to have 50 opt-outs.
Yeah.
My heart does not bleed for super teams that didn't figure it out till week 12, though, is what I'm saying.
That's okay.
And I'm very curious, too.
Nor does mine.
And I'm very curious, too, how the general public is going to feel if the next national champions are, teams that lost 2 or 3 times that middled around all year and then got hot at the end of the year, if they're going to like that. Like if this year's national championship race is a prognostication or a clue into what it's going to look like more years than not, I think people are going to become frustrated by that because nobody wants Alabama to have a third or fourth chance.
Well, I think you're heading down wrong street again, Ari.
You do? Boy. You think that Ohio State, like people were like, oh, thank God Ohio State got a third chance this year.
I think people learn that that's the way this works now. Plus, I also think schedules are harder, so it's going to be hard to go undefeated. Yeah. I think a lot of what has stood in the way for you is I think you're underestimating how people will simply react to a new world. And how people's brains can really quickly flip to, okay, now the goal is X. And that's what I'm rooting for my team to do is X. So, and I know I don't want to get down the whole rivalry game. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Please don't do it. We don't have time for that. I would get mad at you.
But I think there's a complete relearning, re-education, if you will, of what it means to follow this sport and root for your team in this sport that is currently going on. I understand it's stark for all of us, but I do think we're literally living through evolution.
Yeah. And the part that made me happy, and again, I don't know if this is going to continue, but we saw it this year. We were still dumbfounded by the Ohio State-Michigan game.
Right.
In the moment, it was, oh my God. Right. And then in the moment when ASU is beating Texas, and oh my God, like that is the whole point of this.
Yeah.
The more times the sport can make you go, oh my God, that's what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. The Ohio State Michigan game was certainly a earthquake. And Ohio State fans still take that personally, as they should. You know what will be interesting, because it's going to happen eventually, and it might not be the Ohio State Michigan game. It might be the Iron Bowl. It might be another rivalry. When the rivalry game happens in November and one team beats the other, and then they face each other again in the playoff, and the team that lost the first one wins the second one, that's the death blow to me.
You mean like
I hope
when
that
the Eagles played the Commanders the third time this year?
Yeah. And there you go again with the NFL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The most popular sport in America. It works pretty well.
I think that's going to be the death blow of like what those games actually mean.
I don't know. The Commanders seem pretty happy when they beat the Eagles.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I think you overrate some of like where the feeling, the in the moment. I think that's a big part of all of this is I think that we get so caught up in the stakes of this all and how the stakes have changed that we forget that in the moment we can get drawn to, a Texas Tech game against, we can get drawn to a game between two teams with 4 losses that goes overtime and it blows up your Twitter timeline. So that I think there's a certain amount of in the moment for this sport when a rivalry game goes a certain way that doesn't get lost.
Right.
Just because the stakes beyond the game are different.
Yeah, we spend so much time, Ari and I, on our show being 30,000 feet above it,
right?
And trying to explain what it all means. But thank God that when the game is on, and it doesn't matter which game, and it doesn't matter what week, I'm still sucked into it.
Yeah.
And all I care about is that moment.
Yeah.
So
and like you said, like the Ohio State Michigan game, I remember when we recorded the video outside of Texas Roadhouse, like that was like, holy crap. Like it didn't feel any less big that day.
Right. In fact, Ari, I don't want to cut you off there, but I felt like this season, I wrote this at some point, we are starting to learn to be more in the moment of this season and not so worried about it's week 5. Are their playoff hopes over?
Yeah.
It's week 7. Is the season over? I think it allows you to live in the moment a little longer because everything is not so definitive in the moment. There are more possibilities beyond that moment.
Yeah, there were so many fewer instances in October and September of, well, they're done.
And for example, as we look on
and
the
when
screen,
we did
right?
it, we were wrong.
Your shining moment, like the fact that you, after Northern Illinois, as awesome as the Northern Illinois upset was, it was one of the moments of the season. It just because it didn't end Notre Dame's season doesn't mean it still wasn't one of the awesome moments of the season.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think we prematurely remember we were doing that list of, here are the 23 teams who are still left to make the college football playoff. And every week I would publish it and you'd be like, hey, what about this team? I'm like, oh God, you're right. Like we would like eliminate teams prematurely based on preconceived notions of how the thing would work. And then another upset would happen and then it would open the door back open to this team. And it's like, the
craziest thing, I just keep thinking about this going into that last Saturday. And you and I had this conversation when you were making that list. I was like, Ari, I think Baylor's still mathematically alive to make the Big 12 championship game. You're like, what? And I'm like, no, here's the scenario.
Yeah, the Big 12 is that meme of, why can't you just be normal?
But I love it. Like that was exactly what I hoped it would be this year. And I hope it's even more nuts next year. And it was a lot of fun.
The 12-team playoff is absolutely perfect if we actually get a season next year where there are no super teams and there are legitimately 17 teams who are good enough if they put it together to win. Like that's when you need it.
Where it feels like 10 of the 12 teams can really win the whole thing.
And I've told you guys this too before. It was on the text thread at some point. Like, hey, I do think that maybe we might be going a little overboard with the parity talk. And we're probably still looking at a world where 6 teams.
We say this and Alabama's going to go 16-0.
Yeah, I think that we're still looking at a world where the teams that are able to win it all are still a relatively small number. But think about it. If you go from 3 to 6, you've doubled it.
Yeah.
Like that's a
Yeah,
lot.
I think
There's a big difference.
I think we might have actually gone from 4 or 3 to 10 or 12, which changes the entire. I mean, like, listen, Notre Dame would have been between 9 and 12 like 2
the
years
other thing is,
ago. Like, and they were
Ole
playing
Miss,
for the title
the
this year.
roster. If you throw the Ole Miss roster into the playoff, that
Yeah.
team, if it gets hot, could have won the thing.
But here's the other thing too, Ari. It's not just can you win the whole thing. If you get in and you're capable of winning a game, that throws off everything. Right?
Everything.
Because maybe
Right.
you are knocking off one of the teams that can win the national championship, which means that the trickle down on that going forward determines who wins the national championship.
And this year, we got that. Now, funny enough, Arizona State was a higher seed, but I think if Arizona State would have beaten Texas, it would have been the equivalent of,
Huge.
8 beaten 1 in a way that is hidden in the dysfunctional seeding. And I mean, Arizona State literally basically beat Texas. I know they didn't end up winning the game, but they
It was
did.
a 4th and 13 that Texas
they
converted
did
and win it.
enough.
Like it was over.
So and that to
That
me
game
is like
was
the
a
one
tie.
thing
Tie,
too that
I
The
mean,
game is essentially a tie.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
When you
and
go
I
triple
and I said,
overtime.
like, we're not going to get upsets in the football bracket like we do in the basketball bracket. And by God, I was wrong.
Well, you
It
only
hasn't
need
happened
one
yet, but I was wrong. And it's going to happen more than I thought.
And again, you only need one because there's just fewer games. You only need one, maybe two, to throw everything into a tizzy. Unlike on the basketball side.
Yeah.
Well, it was a lot of fun this season. I was so happy to be back with Ari. So happy that Ralph came back as a listener and was on our asses
Love you, Ralph.
constantly. It was amazing.
I love you both. I am one of your most loyal listeners. I am already disappointed that I'm not going to get a chance to torch you over your crazy top 25 coaches list. But maybe,
It's
what?
a long off season, Ralph.
It's a
I
long
am-
off season.
I'll show up at your apartment in Brooklyn and
and we can
I
just
am
do that
interested.
offline. I can just do
I'm
that
interested in hearing what you thought was crazy because when you
Deion
said,
Sanders at number 7.
yeah, it was
David
the
for the
eighth-
next version
No,
of this.
I know, but I just want you to know, Ralph, the reason why I didn't respond was because you did it like the day it published, during which my entire phone was, what the hell is this? And I just didn't have the energy to have the same conversation with 50 people. But I would I respect your opinion, and I would love to talk through a lot of that. Maybe we can, it's a long off season. Maybe you can come back and we can do it here in a few weeks.
Oh, well, the ombudsman is always welcome here on the show, Ralph.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you
guys.
so much.
Thanks, Ralph.
And thank
Thanks, guys.
you for listening. We'll talk to you on Monday.